Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 260 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. It is another 10th episode, everyone, if you can believe it. Every 10th episode, we do a book giveaway, and this time we have 3 fantastic selections.
Yes, these are all hardcover books. They're going to go to one lucky person on our newsletter subscriber list. So if you've been thinking about becoming a newsletter subscriber, now's a great time. We're going to give you a couple of days before we do the giveaway. You can go to bookcougars.com, and there is a tab on the website where you can subscribe. You can also go to our show notes at bookcougars.com, and there's a link there for you. We're going to pick the winner on Friday, May 22nd. So become a newsletter subscriber by Thursday, May 21st. And the books, you're asking, what are the books? Agnes Sharp and the Wedding to Die For. This is by Leonie Swann. Some of you may recognize that author. She is the author of 3 Bags Full. This is a really fun series about a woman who one might think can't be doing the things she's doing because of her age, but she proves them wrong. FINLAY Donovan Crosses the Line, the newest installation in the FINLAY Donovan series by Elle Cosimano. And then a standalone novel, Missing Sisters by Joshilyn Jackson. Revenge. It's all relative.
And that is blurbed by Karen Slaughter. So
yeah, it's a good one.
It's a good one for sure.
Yeah.
And our newsletter is completely free. We send one a month. So become a newsletter subscriber. There's no reason not to.
Yes, we're friendly people.
We also have a PSA here. I was at the Portland Public Library recently. There is a Portland, Connecticut, yes. And I noticed a display of super large print books. And I had to check it out because I've never heard of super large print books. But these are indeed books that have super large print. They're like 60 font or so, like really big as I could get my e-reader to make fonts. And we're not associated with this company at all. We just wanted to help spread the word about what we think is a great resource for people who do need larger print and who may not be comfortable or wanting to always read on an e-reader. The company is superlargeprint.com, super easy to remember. And I was checking out their about statement, and the company started because the owner wanted to make books for their grandmother who had need of super large print and wasn't comfortable using an e-reader. So check it out. On their website, the books are broken down into different categories like romance, history, and there's some crossover. Like I looked at Little Women. I think that's in romance, children's, and historical fiction maybe. I'm not sure. So, you can get a feel for that. And then also we have a correction to offer from the last episode.
This is from Kate, who says that she's often listening while driving and is yelling at us about things that we're saying that are incorrect in her nice way. Kate is very nice.
She is very nice. And we do misspeak quite often. And this one involved 3 really good books.
Indeed. Blunt Instrument by Amy Bloom, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I'm going to couch this conversation by saying, if you've been listening long enough, you know that I am not very good with names.
Right, yes. So Emily was talking about it, and she referred to one of the people in that forthcoming book by Amy Bloom as like Mrs. Danvers from The Haunting of a Hill House. Well, Mrs. Danvers is actually in Rebecca. And in The Haunting of Hill House, the caretaker woman is actually Mrs. Dudley. So thank you, Kate.
I stand corrected. It happens often, especially when it comes to names for me. So thank you. We appreciate you.
It's interesting that they're both D names.
Yeah. Thank you for making me feel better, Chris.
Of course. That's what I'm here for.
Hey, Chris, what are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading a bunch of stuff. None of my plans from the last episode have panned out because Booktopia is such a big upheaval experience. I always forget that, one, I don't read a lot during Booktopia because, you're spending time at author events and hanging with friends and then just kind of exhausted.
Yes.
And then also it takes me a couple days to kind of like come down from that and really focus. So the books that I did start last episode, such as Friction, a biography by Jennifer Vale, that kind of got put on hold because I'm all of a sudden like just wanting to read fiction. So I'm enjoying friction, but I just thought, you know what? Don't make yourself read it because that's not enjoyable. I'm not in school, so
right.
It is there when I'm ready for it. I did start Tradwife by Saratoga Schaefer, who was one of the Booktopia authors. And I wanted to read this book in part because it has a great cover. It's blurbed as kind of being a Rosemary's Baby for like the digital influencer age, which, you know, great selling point there. But I had also just finished Yesteryear by Caro Claire Burke. And so the whole Tradwife thing has been on my mind. And it's off to a great start. Tradwife Saratoga Schaefer was one of the Booktopian authors that we saw in one of the sessions I attended with her. She said it took her a month to write the book, which is shockingly short. But it's a topic that she has been filing away, things that she's seen online for years. And she was having a conversation one day with her sister that kind of solidified, like, yes, I need to write this book. So Tradwife didn't take her long to write, but it was like years in the making, just from storing away bits and pieces of things she happened to come across. I'm also starting I've started another book. I'm like 30-40% into this one. And it is These Walls Remember by Del Sandine. This one comes out August 18th. And I'm reading it in part because I really enjoyed her first novel, This Cursed House. And she's African American, and she is writing Black Southern Gothic novels. So think really good atmosphere, strange things happening. In this new book, These Walls Remember. In this book, it's two sisters. The opening, one of the sisters is sitting in a lawyer's office. She's just inherited stuff from her great aunt who passed away, who she didn't know really. And she finds out she's also inheriting this along with her estranged sister, who, of course, comes waltzing into the lawyer's office late because she is the sister who is always late and chronically problem, whereas the other sister is the upholder and does everything correctly. So they inherit this house. They want to flip it. Chapter 2 then goes back in time to like 1910, where this man has just finished building the home. His very pregnant wife with their first child comes to walk around as it's, she just finished it. And, things are going to happen. So more to come on that book. Her books are a little on the slow side, because there's that psychological aspect that's happening, but I'm sticking with it. And I just this morning started, and this is going to be the book that kind of takes priority because I have a time limit on it. It's From Potter's Field by Patricia Cornwell. This is Scarpetta, number 6. And I have to read it by next Thursday because that's when John and I are meeting to have our conversation about this one. You'll hear John and Emily and I talking about our buddy read and how it's going later on in this episode. But this one starts off with a bang. It's Christmas and Santa ends up shooting someone. That's all I'll say.
Ooh, okay. So I am reading 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swann. And this is one that's been on my radar before. I tried to read it once before. It didn't really work for me. And right now I am just finishing a grant cycle. For those of you who've been listening to the podcast for years, you know that my brain gets fried during this annual spring grant cycle that I do for a client that I work for. And so I, too, have been picking up a lot of books and putting them down because my brain's like, I cannot do this. But I started this one yesterday and I'm loving it. It's funny. The concept is about these sheep. It's told from the point of view of a group of sheep. And on the opening page, they find their shepherd dead in the grass from a shovel to the chest. Ooh. Actually, a spade to the chest, to be specific. Yes. But it's very funny. And I'm listening to it, I should say, on audio. And the narrator is Carolyn Lennon, who's doing a great job. It's the 20-year anniversary edition of this book. So it has a foreword by A.J. Finn that's really fun. And the book starts with listing off the characters, otherwise known as sheep, and things about them. For example, Miss Maple, the smartest sheep in Glenkill and possibly the world. That is how she's described. So it's very sweet, very funny. I'm enjoying it. And part of the impetus for me wanting to get to it is because it is now a movie out in the movie theater starring Hugh Jackman. I'm very curious how they're going to do all of the sheep stuff. And then the other book I'm reading is also from Booktopia. And just to let people know, we've talked about Booktopia many times. We are going to do our full recap of Booktopia in the Biblio Adventure segment of this episode. But this book I'm reading is called Take It From Me, An Agent's Guide to Building a Nonfiction Writing Career from Scratch by Alia Hannah Habib. And it's signed. I got it signed by Alia when we were there. And we got to hear her talk about this book in a really cool session, which we will talk about, like I said, coming up here. But something happened for me that was really funny. And Chris was like, you have to mention this on the next episode. I am as famous as Emily Fine is, which isn't very famous, but I'm famous for saying to my friends, I really disdain when authors read from their books at events. And I particularly mean like when most of the event is them reading. And I particularly mean if I've read the book, because it's like, I've already read your book. I want to hear more about you and why you wrote it, etc. But Alia read a portion of this book and I went and bought it right away. And it was because of her reading. Mm-hmm. So I stand corrected. I guess I do enjoy hearing authors read from their books. And what she was reading was a metaphor that I thought she built really well about having a blood drawn, and how then she was able to bring that back full circle and bring it to what it means to be an agent and be in the world of publishing, which is not something she ever thought she would accomplish. And that's what this book is about, her life as a literary agent, and also really giving people the play-by-play that if you're interested in publishing a work of nonfiction, here's how you do it. And she is an agent of heavy hitters like Hanifa Adurakeb and Nicole Hannah Brown, Clint Smith. So she knows of what she speaks. Again, that's Take It From Me by Alia Hannah Habib.
Yeah, she was really sweet in that event because she said, when I first was told we'd be reading, from a book for this event, I thought, which of my author's books should I read?
Yes.
She's like, oh, I'm reading my own. Okay, I got it.
That's right. I'm now published. Yeah, that's really, I know. And then she was like, how could I choose? Like, what if it got back to them that I read from this one and not that one? Yeah. And so then it was almost like a relief. Oh, I can read my own, which was funny. So, Chris, what did you just read?
Well, I finished Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This was an audiobook I listened to, narrated by Ray Porter. Loved it so much. I've already glowed on about it. I listened to it mainly when I was driving, and I don't have a very long commute, so it took me a while to get through it. And I did listen to it a little bit at home, like when I was doing some chores here and there. Loved it so much. Loved the story. I cannot wait to see the movie. What was funny is, I'm listening to this while I was also reading Yesteryear, and Yesteryear is about a trad wife, and there's a scene about doing the laundry as one did back in 1850 if you were a homesteader, and how grueling that work was, how it took hours and days, and it was never ending. So I just had read that, and then in Project Hail Mary, there's a scene where the protagonist is like, ooh, I'm kind of smelly. I need to do my clothes. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's, no washing facilities on this spaceship he's on. So he's like, oh, we do have a deep freeze. He just folds his clothes up and puts it in the deep freeze so all the bacteria will be killed. So at least his clothes won't smell anymore. They may not exactly be clean looking, but they don't stink anymore. And I thought, what a difference, right? In how to handle that from 1850 to kind of current day in space. And so that was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Completely, highly can't recommend this one enough, especially as an audiobook.
So cool. And didn't that narrator win awards?
He did. He's won several awards. He won an audio award for science fiction, recognized for his excellence in audiobook narration, and then also an Audible Narrator of the Year.
Yeah, and Chris heard about this. It was suggested to her by Kim, one of our listeners at our Patreon reading salon, and she said it's her favorite audiobook and she listens to it over and over.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say already that you'd be happy to listen to it again.
Oh, yeah. It will be a comfort listen for sure, because his voice is so wonderful and his performance is excellent with all of these different accents. And then the character himself is charming.
I finished Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fanny Flagg.
Yay!
And I can confirm that I have never read it before. I wasn't sure since it came out so long ago. I'm not going to talk about it because this is our Q2 read-along for our year of reading book-to-film adaptations. We are going to be discussing it later in June after we have our Zoom conversation with listeners, which, reminder, is June 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We still have a couple spots open. So if you've been thinking about joining us, send us an email at hello@bookcougars.com. We also have that Goodreads thread open all the time. And I really enjoyed it. I really did. I'm so glad we chose this one for so many reasons. But that's it. I'm going to just drop that there.
I just want to say, too, like, we will have that conversation on June 7th with Zoom, anybody who wants to attend who registers. But we'll also have an extended conversation on the podcast episode that follows that, where we'll dig into the book and the movie as well in a bit more detail for those listeners who can't attend that conversation or don't like to attend book conversations like that.
Yeah, so we will be going over it. I'm also torn whether I want to read The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop, which is the sequel. One of our listeners, Deb, recently read it and gave it rave reviews. I'm afraid if I read it, it might confuse my conversation. When you do that and then you're like, oh, wait, which book was that?
Wait a little bit, right? Yeah, until after.
Yeah, maybe I'll wait till after our conversation and then read it. But I do want to read it.
I also read an essay that was mentioned at Booktopia, written by T. Kira Madden. This is in Lit Hub in 2019. The title is Against Catharsis, Writing is Not Therapy. So T. Kira Madden's first book was a memoir. And, a lot of people make assumptions about writing memoir or writing autobiographical fiction that the things that happen in these characters are actually her or the writer, not necessarily her, but any writer, especially of memoir. And she talked about how when she writes, it takes her a long time, for one, because she is really about her craft, but she's also about making the book something for readers and not a journal entry. As she says in this essay, like, writing in your journal to process things is, priceless. Like, it's really good, and you can do a lot of healing with words, but that's not what she's doing when she's writing for the public. And so she talks about creating characters in a way that the reader is going to go along on a journey with. It's about the reader. It's not her. And I really appreciated that a lot. Because in that session, now this is talking about her new novel, Whidbey. And she says, she goes through many revisions of it. And if she can still see pieces of herself in any particular character, she knows she still has revision to do. So I really enjoyed the essay. It is free to read, and we'll put a link in the show notes for that again. That was T. Kira Madden's Against Catharsis.
And I believe the name of her memoir was All the Fatherless Girls.
Something like that. Yeah, I haven't read it, and I know that was a big award winner. I'm curious to read it now. And I wasn't really interested in reading Whidbey until her session. Mm-hmm. And I'm so looking forward to reading it now, just hearing her talk about her writing process.
Yeah, and Whidbey is a novel that is told from the point of view of three different women. And the theme of it, so Content Warning, is about child abuse. And I can't wait to read it also, which is not something I thought I would say about a book with that subject matter. Mm-hmm. But after hearing her, I feel the same way.
Yeah, you feel like you're in good hands. Because, I've seen live lit situations and also writing situations when I've been in writing groups where somebody will read something and it's just like, wow, they have not processed that. Because, like, as an audience member, you want to take care of them.
Right, it's too
and
raw.
They're having a breakdown,
yeah.
So I appreciate the way she talked about this situation and this issue. And I think it's something for memoir readers to consider, too. Even if you're not going to read her novel, Whidbey, check it out.
Mm-hmm. I finished another Booktopia author's book, The Curious Calling of Leonard Bush by Susan Gregg Gilmore. Susan had been at Booktopia, like the original Booktopia, 15 years prior. And so this was a homecoming for her, kind of an anniversary to be there. And it was really fun for her to be there with this new novel. One of the exciting things is Susan won the 2025 Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction for this novel, which recognizes exceptional Southern writing. And it took her a long time to write this book. So what a great thing that she's experiencing success with it. I enjoyed it so much. It is about a young boy Leonard Bush, who lost his leg due to an infection. He was fishing by the creek and stepped on something and his leg got infected and it had to be amputated. This is the very opening scene of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything for you here. And Susan told the story of why she came to write it. She was teaching at the Appalachia Young Writers Conference, and she has to read what these kids write. That's a very strong word. That's part of her job. And she was like, I couldn't read one more story about zombies. So she got the idea. She saw that there was a cemetery nearby, and she got the idea to take the kids to the cemetery, have them read the headstones, and that could inspire them to write something based on what they read off of a headstone. And she was there, and she saw this gravesite that said Leonard Bush's leg, 1953, and she couldn't let it go. And that was the impetus for writing this book. Now, she made it very clear that this is a work of fiction. It has nothing to do with who Leonard Bush actually was or how he lost his leg. But anyway, that's what the book is about. I think Kate, who we talked about at the beginning of this episode, when she read it, it's just a delight to read her writing. It's not hard work. It's not going to upset you. She just, like a lot of Southern writers, tells a really good story. So if you're looking for something like that, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Again, it's called The Curious Calling of Leonard Bush by Susan Gregg Gilmore.
Well, I really enjoyed meeting her. Meeting her was one of the highlights of Booktopia for me. The first day when they had like the evening reception, I got to meet her and talk with her a little bit, and such a delight. I can't wait to read her books.
Yeah. She has a backlist of 3 other books too, all works of fiction. So you could definitely spend a little time with her. The other book I read was inspired by our weekend at Booktopia. This is called Coven by Jennifer Dugan, who is a Booktopian author. And this is a graphic novel, and it's illustrated by Kit Seaton. It pubbed in 2022, and it is a YA graphic novel. And the opening section of it, there's a panel with MZ, who is the main character in the book, and she's kind of flitting around her room in her closet like a teenager would. But she goes to light a candle, and I'm showing this to Chris, she kind of flicks her hand and she lights the candle with her hand. So right away you're like, not everybody can do that. And there's even a breakout image of the panel that shows you the candle lit. So I really spent time with this page. Chris and I talk about how graphic novels can be tricky for us because we tend to focus on the words. But what was really cool about this page is there was only 2 words on the whole page. It says California now. So then you really do look at the images. So it gives you this insight into MZ, who is living as a teenager in California. But the beginning, this is like the 3rd page. In the beginning, something dark happens and you're not in California. You're in upstate New York. So it starts upstate New York then, and it's really dark and something bad happens and there's a person with blood on them, and then 3 pages in, you're at this bright page that says California now, shows MZ dancing around her teenager room and then lighting this candle with her hand. So you get an impression right away that there's a little darkness in this book, but also that our main character has some special powers. And then very soon after that, in the pages, after she talks to her girlfriend on the phone, because this is also a sapphic graphic novel, I should say, her parents come into the room and say, we have been called back to New York. Something has happened with our coven. There has been a death, and we need to go home. And she, as a teenager, as you might imagine, is not very pleased with this. The story takes off from there. She goes back to upstate New York very grudgingly, enters high school there, and has the classic high school angst of trying to fit in. Also, at the same time, learning more about who she is and how her family fits into this particular coven, because her parents had moved to California to raise her in, quote, a normal lifestyle. And now she's being forced to face something else. I really enjoyed it. It's my first time reading Jennifer Dugan. Chris read her book, Anderson in Bloom. And we will talk more about meeting Jennifer in our Biblio Adventure segment. This was a fun read. I read it in one sitting and really enjoyed it. And I loved the colors. It's very colorful. So the illustrator, Kit Seaton, did a great job.
That's cool. I have her Hot Dog Girl on hold from the library. So looking forward to that very much.
So let's talk about Biblio Adventures. When I was preparing for this episode, I said to Chris, every Biblio Adventure I did was with you. We had joint jaunts galore, and that makes me so happy.
We did. Oh my gosh. Even some that I forgot about.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny because time, you know how time is, especially when you're traveling and you have so many delicious books.
Yes. So let's start with Emily Franklin at R.J. Julia's, because that was actually the Wednesday before we went to Booktopia.
Yes, so we're going in chronological order.
We're going to try, at least. Yeah, so Emily Franklin is the author of Love and Other Monsters. She was featured in an author spotlight a couple episodes ago. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And a reminder that if you are doing your bingo card for this year, your page-to-screen bingo card, Love and Other Monsters would be a great option for your Frankenstein-adjacent reading square on your bingo card.
Yes. I'm amazed at how much Frankenstein comes up in books.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Frankenstein was mentioned in Yesteryear. Frankenstein was mentioned in a recent Patricia Cornwell novel I read. It's like Frankenstein is just mentioned so much, used as such a shorthand.
Yeah, it's true. I agree. And one of the things I want to mention that Emily did that I just thought was really fun and I'd never seen in an author event before is when we arrived, there were postcards with the cover art on them on every seat at RJ's. And it was very well attended because Emily's husband is from Guilford, so her in-laws had done a big food spread and wine and everything to welcome people, and there were a lot of friends of her in-laws there, so all the seats were full. But the postcards were already stamped, and at the end of the event, she said, I'd really love it. I'm going analog. I'd really love it if you would take that postcard and address it to somebody and let them know that this is a book you would recommend. So think about who you think would like this book. Put this postcard in the mail to them. What a great marketing idea.
Or just like, I just saw this author speak. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you didn't want to do it, to just give her the card back.
Right, exactly.
You know,
yeah.
Which I appreciate too, because that costs money to create, and then the stamp is money. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. And she just said, you know, word of mouth marketing really helps. And one of the themes of her conversation was about the nature of memory and memory as a form of protest, and that we don't forget what happens to us. That really resonated with me. And she was not in conversation with anyone. She was at a podium with a very well-prepared, I don't want to say speech because I don't feel like she was doing that, but like a conversation. She was in conversation about her art, and she did a great job. And then at the very end, when after people had asked questions, there was the last person who raised her hand did say, could you read a little bit from it? Mm-hmm. And she did.
Yeah. Which
was nice. So it was a great event.
Totally.
I'm really glad we went.
Really good. Really well attended. Mm-hmm. I had to walk around to the other door to get in because, for those of you who've been to RJ Julia in Madison, you know the layout, and they have different event spaces depending on the size that they anticipate.
Yeah. So, and hers was very full.
It's good to see.
And then next we did go to Booktopia. We got in the car and drove up to Manchester, Vermont to spend a weekend with friends and authors at Booktopia.
Yeah, such a good time. Really excited this year. I mean, I had read 2 of the books, I think. Yes, I read Jung Yoon's book, All the World Can Hold, and then Jennifer Dugan's Anderson in Bloom.
Yes,
so
we got it right.
That was really nice. And the other ones all sounded really good, and I'm excited about all of them. I mean, that's the thing, like when you hear an author speak, sometimes it could be like, whoa, that book's not for me, but I'm really glad to learn about it. And other times it's like, oh, another book I got to read.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Yeah, and what they do with this is they start you off with, we registered ahead of time and paid a certain amount of money, but you get $50 back in the form of a gift card to the bookstore. This is a bookstore where it is not hard to spend money. It is one of the best independent bookstores around. And the first breakout session is with booksellers from the bookstore. And the title of it is, "This Gift Card is Burning a Hole in My Pocket." And each of them went up to the podium in the church next door to the bookstore and gave us their little, kind of the same idea as a shelf talker or their elevator pitch about why they chose a book. And they gave us this handy dandy handout, which was so nice. So we could take notes on it and also just remember after the weekend was over which bookseller said what. We are going to scan this in and create a PDF and put a link to it in the show notes so you too can see all of the books that were discussed. It's a great resource to build a TBR or put books on hold at the library.
Absolutely. Or maybe order directly from Northshire.
Oh, yes. You could do that as well.
So moved. Great resource. I really enjoyed that.
And then the rest of the weekend is spent hanging out with friends and then also going to different breakout sessions. Some of them are with an author by themselves. Some of them they're in conversation with another author. And some of them they were in conversation with these different booksellers that we're talking about.
Yeah, like I went to see Saratoga Schaefer speak on her own solo. I had to because, like, great book. The book is Trad Wife. It's one word. I know there are a lot of different books out there with Trad Wife in some combination, but Trad Wife, one word, and it is a horror novel as opposed to a thriller, which is what Yesteryear is. But it is about a young influencer, Trad Wife, who really needs a baby, really wants a baby, want and need. I'm not really sure. And the opening scene is so fantastic because she is setting up a shot in her bathroom to record her reaction to the pregnancy test she just took and hasn't looked at yet. So you get a sense of like how hardcore she is as an influencer to be videoing that type of situation. But it was really great to hear her talk about it because this is her second novel. Her first was really well received. And the timing of a book coming out with such a strong theme is something that came up in one of her other discussions because one of the questions was about writing towards a fad, you know, and she basically said, you know, but if you choose to write about a fad, like unless you're a fast writer, chances are it's going to be over by the time your book is finished and published, you know. It just so happened that hers came out when it did. You know, it's like we've talked about it before, like ideas that are in the ether, right? And a couple people take it and then all of a sudden you have, you know, books on a similar topic coming out at the same time. But that's people who have their finger on the pulse of things or who are attracted to a certain thing that they see on the internet, right?
Yeah. And the influencer lifestyle in general, I find fascinating because how much of it is, quote, real and how much of it is performative.
Right.
You know?
As I said, Trad Wife right now is on hold as I dive into the next Patricia Cornwell. But so much of Yesteryear is about performativeness, even in your own life, like how much of it is performative.
And then how is it affecting these children they're raising? But that's a conversation for another day.
Oh, and religion, like, right? That God is the original audience member.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it's fascinating, you know? Yeah, and we got to see Jung Yoon.
Yes. All the World Can Hold is her new novel out now, which we both enjoyed. And we got to see her in conversation and have some social time with her as well, which was lovely.
Yeah, and during the big event, as they call it, where all the authors come together and speak or read from their work for like 10 minutes each, she actually read a personal essay. And, you know, part of the promotion of All the World Can Hold is that it's her most autobiographical novel yet. And I know we talked about, like, did she feel the need to make this known? Was it a publisher thing, marketing, like this is an angle we can take it? But apparently it was very much her, Jung, talking about her own experience, because if you've read All the World Can Hold, or if you're interested in it, it is action that takes place on a cruise ship that sails 5 days after 9/11 happened. And that actually happened to her in real life. And she talks about how an earlier Booktopia years ago was such a moment for her because she realized in talking about it, finally, it really broke something open in her that she would be able then to write the story that she wanted to write.
Right. So what Chris was saying is that at one point of the weekend, because most of the sessions, you're going to these breakout sessions with one or two of the authors, maybe a handful more. But then they have one session that all the authors attend, and many of them read something they've never read before or tell you a story. Or in Saratoga's case, she stood up, Saratoga, the author of Tradwife, stood up and said, I could read to you all from something, but I'm dyslexic, so it wouldn't be fun for anybody. So I'm going to do a question and answer segment.
Yeah. Would you rather this or rather that? And it was hysterical.
It was hysterical, and it was kind of in between a set of other authors, so it was also like a nice change of pace. And Jung, the story she told about her experience at 9/11 had taken place at that part of a Booktopia many years prior. And after that weekend, she realized like maybe it was time for her to try to tell the story, because she had tried to write something about it in years prior and it never worked. The story she was trying to tell just wasn't coming out the way she wanted to tell it.
Right, exactly. And now it has. And then at that event with all the authors, the big event, she actually read a personal essay, which is something she really hasn't done. She's newer to writing personal essays and or sharing them.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful.
It was beautiful and really heartfelt.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things she told us in her breakout session is that if you are a person of a certain age, which we are similar in age to her, that there is a little wink and a nod to the show Love Boat, which was, if people did watch that, it was told in 3 parts, and there was usually one of the stories, like 3 different storylines. And one of the stories they went more in depth in, and the other 2 were touched on a little bit lighter, and that is how she designed All the World Can Hold.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, Laura and I watched a lot of Love Boat during the pandemic when it was on, and we both watched that when we were younger. But yeah, it was a great setup for a novel.
Yeah.
Because people of a certain age, you will just kind of meld right into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great book. So other sessions you want to talk about?
Well, I was super thrilled by Emma Parry's new book, Mrs. Benedict Arnold. And Emma Parry is also a literary agent, and this is her first novel. And it was interesting to hear her talk about it and her challenges, because, she's a literary agent, and she didn't want, there's that thing of like, oh, are you working for your clients or are you working for yourself? Like, so she made it really clear, like, it was a struggle, to do this project that she really wanted to pursue, the spark of which came from a sentence in a Nathaniel Philbrick book. Nathaniel Philbrick book sparked this research quest that she went on about Mrs. Benedict Arnold. And she was in conversation with John Sayles and Steve Kiernan. And she mentioned the first time she went to an archive. She's like, oh my God. She's like, I could have never left. And she's like, it's one of the best days of my life going into the archive. But this is going to be a book I definitely read for my summer of America 250. I'm really looking forward to that. And another panel that she was on about publishing, like she did say, like, even the big names get rejected. Mm-hmm. Like there's no guarantee that just because you've published X amount of books that your next one is going to get accepted. And I remember seeing Roxane Gay recently on Threads talking about this, mentioning an application she was doing. And they're like, what? You have to apply for that? And she's like, yeah, it never ends. No matter what, you still have to apply.
Right.
And then apparently, as Emma says, get rejected.
Right.
Right? Because it is all the right time, right space. So I'm really looking forward to her novel.
She also said in this panel, and this was a panel where she was in conversation with Alia Hana Habib, the woman I talked about in my currently reading, who wrote Take It From Me, and then Lauren Morrow, who wrote Little Movements, who's a publicist, and they were in conversation with Nicole, who's one of the owners of the bookstore. Emma said, sometimes I just wish that there'd be a hold on publishing so people had more time to read my clients' books.
Right, yeah. Oh my gosh.
I mean, we all who have, like stacks of TBRs, there are times when I do feel that way, even though I love, hearing about all the new books coming out and have favorite authors who have books coming out. It's just can be overwhelming. So I can only imagine being a literary agent and trying to find a place and space for your clients' books.
Right. And I don't remember who said it, but one of them said, like, we deal with the rejection too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, of course the authors are taking rejection very hard, but, you know, they're trying to pitch stuff and they're facing a lot of rejection themselves. And in fact, Alia talked about a revenge tour that she did one time when this book was rejected and rejected and rejected by so many different publishers. And the book was published, huge hit. She sent copies and a letter to everyone who had rejected it. I was like, here you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is an agent who's like, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hilarious. That was a funny session with literary agents and publicists. And speaking of funny events, we also attended a breakout session with Jennifer Dugan and Saratoga Schaefer.
Hysterical.
So funny. To remind you, Jennifer Dugan was there with her book Anderson and Bloom, and Saratoga Schaefer was there with Tradwife. And they know each other. They both live in the Saratoga Springs area, so they are familiar with each other. They both write queer, sapphic in that space. Oh my gosh, so funny. Jennifer Dugan's a mother of 2 teenagers, and she was cracking us up about how unimpressed her children are by her career, which is going gangbusters.
Right, totally.
And she writes so fast and so much and has contracts with multiple publishers because she's writing into so many different spaces, from graphic novels to YA to adult fiction. And then Saratoga was talking about how she actually just is a fast writer, like Chris talked about before, and doesn't have a problem sitting down to write when she knows what she's ready to write, you know. Whereas Jennifer has to use like software and stuff like that to keep track of everything that she's responsible for.
Yeah, and she mentioned that she writes the young adult stuff in the morning and then the adult books in the afternoon. But yeah, she has like 3 different publishers she writes for, and she uses a software that helps track deadlines for all of these different projects that she has. And somebody says, you know, how do you do that? And to quote her, she says, it's called disassociation.
Exactly. She talked about her therapist and why she's in therapy and how helpful it is. The other thing Jennifer said that was so funny is that she read Pet Sematary in 3rd grade because she was given the book by a well-meaning uncle.
Right. Who thought it was a kid's book because, you know, Pet Sematary, and it's spelled like how a kid might. And she's like, yeah, so here I was, you know, reading about Pet Sematary, and all the other kids are like singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you know.
And then she moved on to The Shining by 4th grade. So that was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she talked about content warnings also. That's one thing they both talked about that I thought was really interesting, and how they can be co-opted for book bans.
Yes, they could be easy ways for book banners, like to scan a website or a book and see like, oh, a trigger warning for this, we're going to put it on our potential ban list.
Right. So both of them, what they prefer to do is put them on their websites so people know, you know, what a book is about and can think about it before they decide to dive in. But they're not huge fans of them being books, but often they are.
Even on the website, they said it's kind of iffy, you know, because... Yeah. I think that's the thing. Like once you have one book banned, if you're a author with multiple books, then they just probably cruise your website.
Yeah. She said Hot Dog Girl is banned everywhere.
Yeah.
So
can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a funny thing too. We talked about the revenge tour in publishing, and Anderson and Bloom. One of the things about that novel is one of the protagonists knows flowers and their traditional meaning inside and out. Like her parents were botanists. She grew up in the world of plants. So she makes these lovely bouquets that say something, that really mean something. Because, for example, somebody was buying a bouquet and she's like, do you hate this person? Like, why these flowers, you know, don't really go. But Jennifer explained that she worked with a really shitty person. And I guess when that person left, got promoted, or she left, she sent them a bouquet of shitty flowers. Like all the flowers that mean basically, I hate you, you're a bad person. And that's how she got the idea for Anderson and Bloom. She thought, oh my God, somebody could do this professionally.
Yes.
I thought that's wonderful. Love that.
Was so funny.
Well, it was wonderful to meet Jim and Han during that big event where all the authors come together and speak for 10 minutes or so. And she talked about how she learns from her readers. readers read her books and contact her. But there's one example, she said, of a reader wrote into her because there was a scene with peaches and watermelons. And she's like, it was just a scene with peaches and watermelons. Like, it didn't mean anything in particular. But this person wrote in saying, oh my gosh, that is such a huge tradition in South Korea. She's like, I never heard of it. And she told her family, and no one had ever heard about this significance of peaches and watermelons.
Including someone who'd lived there until they were like 35. So they were, people that would know.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but peaches and watermelons, I guess the meaning of it is that a peach is really soft on the outside, but then hard on the inside. And then a watermelon is hard on the outside and mushy on the inside. And so that, if you get called a peach or a watermelon, somebody's obviously saying something about you.
Right.
So I thought that was a really sweet story to share.
And the last session we went to before we left town on Sunday was with T. Kara Madden, who we've already talked about, and her book is Would-Be. And one of the things she did talk about, as we mentioned, she had a memoir that came out, and she said that oftentimes when she was on book tour for that, because the memoir did very well, she didn't want to be thought of as only as interesting as the worst things that had ever happened to her. And she felt like a lot of people, that's how they were kind of talking to her. And that was part of why she wanted to write this novel, Would-Be. And it took her 8 years to write the novel. And as Chris was talking about, that it's really important for her not to have herself be in the book, that she wants to make sure she's done the work she needs to do. She does her first draft on a typewriter that her grandmother gave her. And there is something about that sound that she said has to do with like productivity and getting in the mood for writing. And that the first draft is where she has the raw emotional material, and then she works to write that out of things like her own personal stuff. And one of the things that she said that I thought was really interesting from a writing perspective is she's not particularly fond of like saying, I must write a certain number of words a day, where you have an author like Jennifer Dugan, who we talked about, who was like, in order to meet all of these contracts, I have a piece of software that tells me how many words I have to write a day, right? But T. Kara Madden said that what she does when she sits down is she works towards 3 surprises every day. And she wants to, in her writing, be surprised. It isn't necessarily about, like, I accomplished 1,000 words today. Just a really different style and approach to writing.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I was surprised to hear her talk about, I don't know why I'm surprised. That's a dumb thing to say. I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know her style at all. But she talked about how she does kind of like the architecture of a story first, and then eventually goes back and adds the emotion. That was very interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And then when she was reading during that big author event, I was really struck by how she read like a poet with a cadence to her. Like it wasn't pretentious at all, but it was very much paying attention to the language.
Yeah. And I mean, just a different kind of writer, like a much more literary writer, I think. And which is probably why it took her 8.5 years to write, just a different style. And I know that she also played around with grammar in her novel, so I'm looking forward to reading that, because she said, the editor didn't love it, but she wanted to do it.
Right. Yeah. And one of the sections, right? Yeah. One of the sections, because there's different speakers. Yeah, really enjoyable. Oh, the whole weekend was great.
It was great. Yeah, we highly recommend you consider attending next year if they do it. We did run into one of our listeners, Carrie, there. Thank you so much for coming over and saying hi, Carrie. And I realized, too, that we might not have mentioned in our enthusiasm to talk about these breakout sessions, we might not have mentioned all of the actual book names. I will put a Booktopia list in the show notes of the books that these authors were there with. And then, of course, you can always look at their backlist, because we mentioned like, oh, they have a memoir or something. But I will just list the books that were featured for Booktopia this year, which are typically the books that they most recently have out.
So one of the authors is Kim Van Elkemade, who is also a bookseller at the Northshire bookstore in Saratoga Springs. And I ended up with the bound galley of her forthcoming novel, The Upstate Dispatch. And I, quote, won this during the Yankee Swap event, which is a lot of fun. People who want to participate in that come with a wrapped book that they think another reader would like. So they're wrapped, they're anonymous. Everybody puts the book in an area, and then we drew lottery tickets. And Kim was actually the MC of this event, so she'd call out the number. The first person came, chose a book. That's the book that they got. And then so on with each subsequent participant. But along the way, what's a lot of fun is that if you get a book, I mean, all of the books sounded really good, but you're not really thrilled with the book because another book looked a lot more appealing, you swap it with that person. And the person has to give it up.
Yes.
That's part of the rules. And then after the last person goes, that first person then gets to pick.
And in this case, it was Susan Gregg Gilmore. And what was really funny is I actually ended up with my own book. Because somebody, towards the very end, somebody stole my book, which I was really looking forward to reading, and gave me my book back. And then author Susan Gregg Gilmore was the person that got to pick first. So she got to do the final steal. And she ended up stealing my book from me, which was the Kamigawa Food Detectives, the first book in that series. And she gave me Chris's book, which was so funny, which was the Abraham Lincoln vampire book.
Yeah, my book was Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter by Seth Graham Smith.
And what was funny is when she bought that book at the bookstore to put in the Yankee Swap, she said, "Hey, Emily, the gentleman caller would really like this book. You could get a copy for him." Well, I did through the Yankee Swap. Yes. And it's also been made into a movie, right?
Yes, it's been made into a movie. And I should also say, I was going to wait a little bit to share this news, but Rob and Elle and I are doing a buddy read of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter in late June. And I read it years ago, loved it. I like Abraham Lincoln a lot. He's my homeboy president. I enjoy vampire books. And it's really good history as well. It's fascinating alternative history. It's set during the Civil War. And how Robin came to it is that Heather Cox Richardson and another historian, I forget his name, but he's the guy who started Historians at the Movies, which started on Twitter back in the day when Twitter was Twitter, where historians would get together and group watch a movie. And so those two historians were talking about Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and how good it is as a historical story. And so Robin had texted and said, "Hey, have you read this one?" And it's one that, it has stayed on my mind. Anytime I see it at a bookstore, I think, I wouldn't mind revisiting that because it was really enjoyable. And I think now it would be a good time to read it, like in our current historical state, to read something that is like serious history, but in a, quote, fun way.
And did you like the movie? Did you see the movie?
I did see the movie, yeah. And I don't really remember much. But yeah, Robin and I are going to read the book and watch the movie. So if anybody would like to join us, send us an email at hello@bookcougars.com.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, so the Yankee Swap is a lot of fun. I'd never heard of it until I'd gone to Booktopia.
Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of a white elephant. If you ever do white elephants with coworkers or family members at holiday or birthday celebrations, it's similar where you get to do steals and all of that, except it's with books. One thing I did learn from the very, very first time I went to Booktopia, which was at the bookshop Santa Cruz in Santa Cruz, California, which is where I met Russell of Ink and Paper Blog. And I was in a Yankee Swap with him, and the book he gave was Cloud Atlas, and he wrapped it and then put cotton balls all over it. And I have learned that the Yankee Swap, part of what gets your book chosen is if you wrap it in an interesting way. Mm-hmm. So,
well, yeah, because the ones that were left were the ones in brown paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 So we readers are also particular to wrapping paper, apparently. Speaking of books to film, we also went and saw Fried Green Tomatoes. 35th anniversary. We went on Mother's Day and saw it on the big screen in this theater in North Haven with very comfortable seats where you could raise your feet and
reclining chairs. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was wonderful. And what was interesting is it was introduced before the movie started by Leonard Maltin, a pretty well-known American film critic. And he talked about, a little bit of the history of the film. He used the term nostalgic, which Chris and I talked about, that sometimes when you're going back into a time in history, in this case with Fried Green Tomatoes, there's a lot of racial unrest in the story. Like, is the term nostalgic a good word to use because we're not nostalgic necessarily for that part of the story, right?
Yeah. I think when I think of fried green tomatoes and I think of nostalgia, I think of my own nostalgia seeing it the first time.
Yeah.
I don't really want to live in the 1920s or 30s.
Yeah.
Unless I could time travel and just come back and forth.
Right.
Different story.
Yeah.
So it is. It's tricky, you know, like that's, you know, Jim Crow. So being nostalgic for that time is, as Emily said, tricky.
Yeah.
And very much about who you are.
Yes, exactly. And then the other thing he talked about is, you know, the movie did win a GLAAD award. And there are LGBTQ themes in the story. But he said that the relationship between Ruth and Iggy is not like super out.
Well, yeah, he used the word lesbian, which is surprising. And I appreciated that. Talking about lesbian content, but that the movie portrayed them as friends and the book does not, that the book is more explicit is what he was saying. And he talked about the book being on the bestseller list for many weeks when it first came out.
Yeah. So that was an interesting way to start the movie. It was also fun to just be in a theater with people that you knew were excited to see this film again, right?
There was clapping at moments in the movie, like, you know, the iconic scene in the parking lot.
Yes, with Kathy Bates. And to see Kathy Bates and
Jessica Tandy
together again, oh, so lovely.
Yeah.
I loved all the performances in the movie. I had just finished the book the day before, so I definitely felt like I saw the things that were different between the movie and the book, saw and understood them, I guess I should say. And a very particular part that I think was different was a lot about the putting us in that place in history, that the book does that a little bit more with little sidebar chapters and characters that you don't experience in the movie.
Yeah. Beautiful film.
Yeah, so glad to see it again and so glad to see it with you. That was really fun. And we heard from Anne, who said when we posted ourselves at the theater on social media, said, I'm going to go see it in 4 hours. Yeah. So we hope some of you really got to enjoy it on the big screen.
And then we got to meet up with two of our listeners. We got to see Deanna again, who's from Virginia, who was in the area coming back from time up in Canada. And she's friends with Linda, another listener. They started doing buddy reads together.
Yes, I think they started with Bleak House by Charles Dickens.
Yeah, they do big ones together, I believe. And so it was our first time meeting Linda, which was great. We met them at the Blackstone Library in Brantford and showed them that beautiful library. And then took a walk over to Slackline Press, which was also my first time being there. Emily's been there several times, so we all had a wonderful shopping experience there.
Yeah, it's got wonderful office supplies and some fun housewares and like soaps and things like that and bags and kitchen towels. Just a beautiful little store. And then she also has a little tiny bookshelf in the back with hardcovers and paperbacks for sale.
Yeah.
Slightly used.
I left with some ink for one of my fountain pens and a new journal and some other fun things. But Deanna brought us books. She brought us each 3 books, and we're just going to quickly say the titles because we know we've been talking for a long time here. Willa Cather, Landscape in Exile by Laura Winters. Displaying Women, Spectacles of Leisure in Edith Wharton's New York by Maureen E. Montgomery. And then A Feast of Words, The Triumph of Edith Wharton by Cynthia Griffin Wolfe. Those were the ones she gave me, and thank you so much. I love them all.
And I received Sizzle and Drizzle, Over 100 Essential Bakes, Recipes, and Tips by Nancy Birtwistle, winner of the Great British Bake Off. And then 2 novels by Ian Reid, who is a Canadian author, FORr and We Spread. Thank you so much, Deanna. And if you want to hear a little bit more about these books, we did talk about them on our most recent Friday Reads video. I will put a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah, we had some nice show and tell with that and an unboxing.
Yes, we did, from another listener whose name happens to be Karen. And then we had one more Biblio Adventure together where we went and saw Carolyn Bix at R.J. Julia's. We went and met our mystery man, and I brought the gentleman caller, and we were there to hear her talk about her book, Monsters in the Archives.
So much fun to see her in person and hear her talk. I mean, she's an English professor. She's a Shakespearean scholar. and she is serving as the first chair of the Stephen King endowed chair at the University of Maine, his alma mater, and had been told not to contact him.
Yes, and then 4 years into her tenure in this position, she got a cold call from Steve.
Stephen King calls her. And they hit it off. He came and he talked with some of her classes, and then their archive opens. So Tabitha and Stephen King have their archives now at their home in a, wonderful state-of-the-art archive. And Carolyn had a sabbatical coming up and had an idea of looking at his archives and talked it over with them, and they said yes.
Right, and she chose 5 books that scared her the most when she read them as a child. She, too, started reading Stephen King at the age of 12, just like... No, Jennifer Dugan was younger.
Yeah,
actually.
She's the youngest I've heard so far. Yeah,
that's right.
I was
were 12.
I was
right?
like 12 or 13. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so she chose 5 books, and that was part of what she, in her proposal to him, told him what the 5 books were. And then when she would go to the archives, those were the only 5 books that she could do research on.
Yeah, and I loved it that she went back and she found the original publications of these books. She starts with The Pet Cemetery because that was her first introduction to Stephen King, and she finds the exact same paperback, mass market edition that she read as a kid because she wanted to recreate that feeling and
of being scared,
and because you know how that tactileness and just seeing a cover of a book that has scared you or brought you joy or whatever can help set that tone for you.
Yeah, and she did read some other things to learn about King's history and how he became a writer. And one of the things she talked about was a column that he had in the University of Maine newspaper when he was a student there called King's Garbage Truck. And it had a lot of liberal politics, which if any of you follow him on social media, particularly Twitter, you'll see. And I think he might be on Threads now. I don't know. I don't really follow him. He is not shy to share his feelings about politics. But she said she really saw the progression of his writing chops develop by looking at those early writings of his.
Yeah, because Night Shift is his first collection of short stories, and she talks about how some of those were published in the university newspaper. And, that he was like, here he is 18 years old writing some of these stories that are amazing. So amazing. Yeah. And she did talk, too, about how a good scary story can metabolize your fears. It can help you with that. That was really interesting because I'm so curious about young people who are generally sometimes anxious types reading Stephen King and horror in general, and just how it is. It is a way to be kind of seen and your fears or your traumas acknowledged, even though your situation might be different.
Yeah, I mean, she said she was a very anxietal child. So the irony of her, reading a lot of Stephen King. I mean, one person in the audience did raise their hand and said, I've read Stand By Me.
Oh. Yeah, somebody wanted...
Can you give me a list of things that aren't scary of Stephen King's? I thought that was really funny.
Well, and one thing she talked about, too, is that how well Stephen King does with children. Like that he really respects children. And there are a lot of kids in his books, which I never really thought about, but there are. And I'm one who doesn't tend to like to read books with children in them. And I'm like, that kind of caused me to kind of reshuffle stuff in my head about what I think, because these stories have kids in them, right? But he treats them as real people. Yeah. And I think that's the thing maybe that bothers me about kids in a lot of books. They're treated as something not like real people, like they're devices. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. It was a great event, also very well attended, and she was funny and did read a little bit from the book, and I'm so glad we went.
Yeah.
It was really fun, and it was fun to be there with John and the gentleman caller.
Yeah, John wore his Misery shirt. Yes. He had his Kathy Bates.
He was definitely the best dressed.
Yeah, I'm your biggest fan. And then he was buying a new copy of Misery.
Yes,
so that was funny. And then I'm going to call this a Biblio Adventure, but Tina from the Chicago area reached out and said, oh my gosh, I read Yesteryear. And, do you want to talk about it? Because I said in the last episode, I need to talk to somebody about it. So we ended up having a really great, hour-long phone call about the novel, and it was fun to talk with somebody in depth about certain things and try and figure out, like, why did this happen and what about that? So thanks, Tina, for that. That was really good. And then the next day, a couple days later, Britta, who's a booktuber, included a bit of a rant about yesteryear in her video wrap-up that she was doing. And so I reached out to her on Voxer, and we had a conversation about different things, because I don't want to say anything spoilerly, but, you know, after you read the novel, like with a lot of thrillers, like I was sucked in 100%, didn't question anything. But then at the end, when you start reflecting back, it's like, oh, you know, you can, you can kind of see the holes here and there. So yeah, it's just fun to talk with people about a book that, I mean, the best part is that I read it so quickly. Yeah. You know, those books that you just gulp down. Yeah. Like, you definitely want to talk about it.
Well, there's definitely a thread going through I have a now Sunset Book Club, a group of us, but we still have a text thread that we mostly wish people happy birthday or say, like, oh my gosh, you have to read this book. And Russell of Ink and Paper Blog, who also does our top 10 episode with us every year, put out, like, I read this, who's going to read it? Because I must talk to somebody about it. And now many people in the group have read it. I haven't, but I actually think we might have a meeting to talk about it, because that's how strongly people feel about it. So
yeah, there's a lot of love and hate and everything in between for this book.
And I think from what you've said, I mean, I was not intending to read it at all. Like, Chris and I talked a lot about it on our drive to Booktopia, actually. And she was like, are you going to read it? And I'm like, nah, you can say anything you want. I'm not going to read it. And now maybe I'll read it. But I think there's also something about those books that have unreliable narrators that really make people want to talk about it, because it's almost like you're questioning your own experience with it, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, is she unreliable, or is she just a bad person? You know?
Interesting.
I mean, you get the story. I mean, it's a first person. I think every first person narrator is unreliable.
Ooh,
because they only see what they see.
Yeah.
They only know what they know. And it doesn't mean that they're intentionally misleading.
Right. Yeah, unreliable can have different meanings.
Yeah.
It can just mean that what they think was their experience. And just as we know, like, two people can be sitting in a room together and have a conversation together and walk out and tell somebody about this conversation, and they have completely different ideas of what was said or what the meanings were or whatever.
Yeah. So like Natalie, that's her name, the protagonist, you know, she is very opinionated. She's very smart. I mean, she gets a full ride to Harvard from some small town in, you know, Utah. And she's very opinionated. And at times, like, you find yourself nodding along with her. And other times it's like, what? And then with, you know, I could talk forever.
Let's not.
Yeah. Well,
let's move on.
We have already talked forever.
Yes. Upcoming Johns. Do you have anything on the books?
I do. I'm going to be going to the Biographers International Conference. Super excited about this. It's my first one, and it's in New York City. It's at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York. It's May 28th and 29th, and really looking forward to the panels, the sessions, and meeting biographers and just kind of immersing myself into that genre.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you. And you're going to get to see Pamela Toller, who was in an author spotlight last year already.
Yes, last year. I can't believe that. Yeah, she's going to be there. And I'm hoping, like, maybe Natalie Dykstra. I'm not sure if she's going. I think Megan Marshall goes almost every year. So it's going to be pretty fun.
Well, I have 2 theatrical page to screen jaunts coming up. One in the theater, 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swann, that I already talked about, starring Hugh Jackman. And I'm really curious how they're going to do the sheep. And then Remarkably Bright Creatures, based on Shelby Van Pelt's debut, is now, I think it just came out this week on Netflix. So I cannot wait to see that. I love me some Sally Field.
That's so cool. I need to read that book. I'm going to be going to see Devil Wears Prada, but I think it's an original screenplay. I haven't looked into anything about the origin of the new storyline or anything because I don't want to know.
And I love the poster. The movie poster is like a very, very high red heel with like a devil spike on the heel part. Upcoming reads, I have Whidbey by T. Kira Madden, who we've already talked about, a Booktopia author. And then The Sizzle and Drizzle by Nancy Birtwistle is definitely very high on my list. One thing, already flipping through it, that I love is that there are QR codes with, I don't know if it's every recipe, that'd be incredibly impressive, but a lot of them. So I'll be watching some video and reading. And then I also have Endling by Maria Riva. When I was visiting my son Jacob in Colorado a few weeks ago, the Aspen Words Literary Award was announced, and this book won, Endling, and it's got a great cover. It just came out in paperback. In 2025, it was longlisted for the Booker, and she's a Ukrainian author, so I'm excited about it. It was also blurbed by Margaret Atwood, who said funny and tragic at the same time, which I always find is so hard for an author to pull off and is impressive when they do.
That just brought to mind something that Jung said in one of her sessions about that she thought she wrote about violence, but she really came to realize she writes about disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very different. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I am definitely going to be reading Twilight Sleep by Edith Wharton. This is the next one in the Wharton groupies. Sean just recently posted the conversation we had about Edith Wharton's ghost stories. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes if you're interested. That's a conversation with Sean, James, Dorian, and myself. And then I will be reading Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. I'm doing it in the same order I originally did, seeing the movie first and then reading the book, but really looking forward to it.
We forgot to mention that Fanny Flagg has a little cameo in the movie. It was really fun.
Yeah, she's the instructor at the blackboard. So if you're going to see the movie, keep an eye out for that.
Oh, we also forgot to mention that on the drive home from Booktopia, we listened to the abridged version that we talked about that we were going to try to listen to, and we did. It's like an hour and 50 minutes or something.
That's right. We did.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, she narrates it.
Yeah.
It was so much fun to listen to that, and a lot of the things came back to me.
Yeah, and I said to Chris when we were done, I said it definitely reminded me of the movie, and I had just started reading the book that weekend at Booktopia, so I, was just slightly into it. So I would not recommend it. That was the funny thing, is like, I wouldn't say listen to the abridged version as your only read, but she did it. 2 hours was a pretty good introduction to the story.
Yeah, and she probably is the one who did the chopping, slicing and dicing, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of felt like a really extended teaser, maybe is a way to look at it. Yeah.
I was saying to Chris, I wondered if it was partly her work on the screenplay. And then we realized that she did leave stuff out that was in the movie, but it did cover a lot of the stuff that was in the movie.
Yeah, fascinating.
So, sorry, we digressed again.
Hey, Fanny Flagg, if you're listening, will you come on the podcast and talk to us about this?
Oh, yes, we would love to have you. Oh, my God, that'd be so fun. We could eat Twix bars and talk to her or whatever. She's eating candy bars through the whole book. Evelyn.
Yeah. Evelyn Couch.
Yeah. So coming up next is our conversation with our mystery man, John Valeri.
For those of you who don't know John is a book reviewer, a book critic. He writes for a variety of different outlets, online and in paper. He also has a YouTube channel called Central Booking. John is involved in so many different bookish things here in Connecticut, including CrimeCon, which is a one-day crime conference for crime fiction lovers. We adore him, obviously.
We love him so much. And he is called our mystery man because when he first started coming on the podcast, he would come with a list of recommendations, mostly in the mystery genre. And I will put a link also in the show notes to our guest interviews page. If you're not aware, on the website, we have a tab that's called guests. And so you could go and see where John is pictured. It literally has every guest's picture and all of the episodes he's appeared on the podcast. If you want to have a short way to cut to the chase of ways to hear his book recommendations, I would recommend you do it that way. But we love him so much that now we also have had him on for different things. And what we're having him on today to talk about is buddy reads. As you know, he and Chris have been doing a buddy read of the Patricia Cornwell series. They also recently read her memoir, True Crime. John and I did a buddy read of Welcome to the Hayanamdong Bookshop by Hwang Bo Riem. And We're going to cut to the conversation, but we also have a little piece that was actually kind of after the conversation was over, where we started talking about why we like to do buddy reads. And perhaps we could have started the conversation with that, but we didn't. So we thought we would just splice that in here so you could hear it. We didn't want it to get lost in the slush audio pile.
Yes. So we're going to start with that, and then it'll go into the beginning of our conversation with John Valeri, and we hope you enjoy. Happy reading.
Yeah. So I think people are, it's just like what we talked about with Huang's book, like looking for community around reading, you know?
Right.
So
it's like the Scarlet Letter, right? But the A is for accountability, because we both know.
No, I mean, I think that's true because we all set these goals for ourselves, but how do you achieve it? Sometimes you do need an accountability partner, right?
Yeah, and I think we're just lucky that we're both like really interested in this, because who else? You know, I've been thinking for a million years I would love to go back and reread those, and I just don't have the time. And who's going to do it with me? And then it's like, well, Chris and I have that in common, so it kind of worked out perfectly.
Yeah,
and I think we're both sort of enjoying it more than maybe we expected to.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
You know, the donuts and coffee don't hurt. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, it's also like then I think it's that because I had a friend tell me this like 2 years ago. She said, I actually schedule phone calls with my friends now because life gets busy. And I think that's the whole other aspect for you guys. It's like not even about the book. It just gives you an excuse to make sure that you get a date on the calendar once a month to see each other. And that's beautiful. You know,
every time I walk by my calendar and I see Chris W., I smile.
I mean, we're all doing the best we can with our time, but as we get older, it goes faster. I mean, people used to say that to me and I didn't believe it, and now I do. So, yeah. So there's that whole aspect too that I think is wonderful. So we're here today to talk about your reading of Patricia Cornwell, both in fiction and nonfiction, and to talk about our buddy read of a work of fiction that has nothing to do with blood splatter and Scarpetta and Patricia Cornwell. But to get us started, I thought I would pipe in about something about Patricia Cornwell that I thought the two of you might find interesting. May I?
No.
Please do. Absolutely not, according to Chris.
The gentleman caller recently retired, and as a gift, I gave him a subscription to the New Yorker magazine, which I have read on occasion, but now we're getting, you know, the one a week that puts you into panic mode if you're an upholder like me. But the first one we got happened to have a piece about Patricia Cornwell. And I thought, what synchronicity? Like here, Patricia Cornwell is very much in my world, even tangentially. And here it came right into my mailbox. So it's in the book current section, and it's titled Patricia Cornwell on Crime and Creativity. And I thought I would just hold up a few books for you guys to see. I know listeners can't see them. There's this one that has the great cover, and it's The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And then this one, which ironically, the gentleman caller had just finished reading, The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas S. Harris. And then Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. And
he's killing it.
The ones that I couldn't find or didn't own or weren't at the library, Ernest Hemingway's The Garden of Eden.
Yeah, she's a big proponent of that book.
Yeah, and so what she talks about, and I don't even know if you can do gift links with the New Yorker. If we can, I'll put it in the show notes. But I really liked that she talked about The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And she said she had been a fan of The Artist's Way as well. But she said what she really liked about this one is that sometimes when you're doing something creative, and this is Patricia Cornwell saying, for me, that's writing, it feels like you're conducting electricity. You're channeling something that comes from outside of you. My favorite books, whether nonfiction or novels, are the ones where you can feel the author's DNA in them, but also feel at the same time like they almost came from elsewhere. And Rick Rubin, in his book, The Creative Act, really talks about that, like how ideas flow through writers, and if they don't capture them, they might not be able to grab the thoughts. So I thought I would just share with you that little reading list that Patricia Cornwell recommends. And I'll put all of those books in the show notes again. And now I'll let the two of you take it away and talk all things Cornwell.
Well, that's interesting. When Patricia Cornwell's Scarpetta series started to kind of go off the rails a little bit, go off the rails is a term people use, I believe I read something that she had hired Julia Cameron, author of The Artist's Way, as a coach, as a creativity coach to help get her mojo back.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you recall that, John?
I do not,
Okay.
but I'm very intrigued by it.
Okay. Now we're letting John speak for the first time. Welcome, John.
You don't want to do that. Hi, thanks for having me. It's so much fun to be at both ends of the fictional spectrum. Blood splatter and books. It's like my two favorite things.
No, but that's really interesting, Emily. Thanks so much for sharing that, because the whole synchronicity thing, Cornwell even brings that up in her memoir, True Crime.
Oh, she does?
Yeah, she does.
Oh,
Synchronicity. She has such a scientific brain, but she's also a bit of a mystic, I think. And John and I could talk a little bit about that from her memoir, True Crime.
Well, yeah, I think that's very true. And she said that she sort of had to train herself not to write like a reporter, too. And everything was very, staccato. But there's also a lot of sort of poetry evident at times in her books. And to speak to the mystical element, even though we haven't gotten there, in the read-along yet, when we get to the more recent books, she really does delve into more speculative territory with, like Bigfoot and aliens and ghosts and whether or not those things exist or, how they're relevant in our world today. So I think that that's a great point. And the Rick Rubin book is terrific. And it's so funny because he's a music producer and his book is all about these creative stories, but so few are actually his own experiences creating music, but it's a very inspirational book if you're a creative and you're looking for some insight into that.
For sure. Yeah. And I think he talks a lot about meditation as well. And so it's interesting to me that Cornwell, you say, has that aspect to her, but then when you two talk, well, I haven't heard you talk yet, John, about the Scarpetta series, but when Chris has talked about it so far, I believe you guys are up to book 5 and starting book 6. That it seems like there wouldn't be room in there for mysticism and things like that based on what the story's about. Is that true?
Well, there's not yet at this point. That's something she explores later on in her books. I think early on she was very much about being in Scarpetta's day-to-day world, which was in the morgue initially, and at crime scenes. And then it starts opening up more to going to different states and then different agencies and eventually to space.
Outer space?
Well,
space.
Yeah.
Oh.
Spoilers.
Yeah, that surprised me. I'm speechless.
She doesn't know what to say. Well, Scarpetta's kind of grounded, but things are happening in space, and she's involved. And the thing that kind of surprised me about the earlier books is I forgot how poetic a writer she can be at times, and so the descriptions are very lush, and at times there are characters who are writing poetry that Patricia Cornwell, wrote for them, and that kind of, surprised me, because I feel like now her writing's maybe a little bit more economical, but in the early books you could really see that. And she did, she wrote poetry when she was younger, and I think she had some poetry published when she was in college, but I didn't remember, that coming through the books as much as it really does in those initial Scarpettas.
Right. And in her memoir as well, True Crime, which is just out now, the earlier years of her life that she writes about, her childhood into her young adulthood, I feel like that writing was really beautifully rendered. Like the pacing was so good. And it was very, I wouldn't say spare writing, but very clean and kind of flowy and not burdened by anything that could have been purple writing, as they say, in this childhood of hers that was filled with a lot of anguish and abuse and neglect and horrific things that happened. It could have been very sensational, but it's not. It reads like this, coming of age memoir in the 60s to the 80s,
No, that's true. And, one thing that you reminded me of when we were talking about this off camera a little while ago is there does seem to be, a little bit of a difference between the first, half or 2/3 of the book and the latter when she's really talking about her life now and creating Scarpetta. And you had mentioned that she talks about writing an autobiographical novel when she was in college, and she does speak to, having kept diaries and journals. I think that, as you mentioned, and I agree, she really did have that to draw on, and maybe that's why, the first half of the book is sort of as clean and coherent as it is, because she had those materials. And another thing I would mention was that you were talking about the trauma, that she suffered in her childhood, and there was so much of that, but she really did turn inside a lot, and there was a lot of imagination and creativity going on in her mind, even though it took a long time for her to realize that she, was meant to be a writer. She had a very rich imagination. She had make-believe friends, as so many of us do, but there was always an internal world that was a contrast to her external world, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously a very observant child and scrappy, to make it through as she did and succeed in high school and college. And her first passion was tennis. She wanted to be a professional tennis player.
Yeah, and she had to play among the men, because there weren't many opportunities for women. And of course, the guys did not like that, especially when she was, routinely beating them. And the other thing I was going to say is, sorry, to go back to that trauma. I mean, it's obvious that it still very much lives within her, but you can see so much of that, in her characters, because they're so dynamic, but they're also damaged in so many ways. And when you read the memoir, it becomes really evident that the emotional truth of what she went through really is inherent in her characters.
Yeah, 100%.
Writing is therapy, it sounds like, right? Like really working that stuff out and sharing it through her characters, maybe.
Yeah, I wonder about that. She's had therapy. Like, I think when writers haven't had therapy and they haven't processed their writing, that's when the writing is like, I think really, I use this word purple. I think it's just like full of way too much of everything. So it's overwhelming to the reader. And I think like she had been institutionalized twice for different issues she was working on. I don't know if she has a regular therapist or not, but I think you could tell like she's processing and reprocessing. And I don't mean reprocessing as in like recycling at all, but like continually looking at these situations in different ways that it impacts her and the character and then the people who are being acted upon or trying to help, that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
It does. So then it makes me wonder, since I haven't read the Scarpetta books, is when you're reading these characters, do you think part of why she's doing it, like we talked about, maybe she's doing it because she's working through or has worked through some of these things, is she also putting these characteristics in these characters so that people see themselves and it helps them? Like, I hate to use the word normalize because I haven't read the books and I don't know what these things are necessarily, but do you know what I mean? Like, do you think that's part of it?
What do you think, John?
Well, I don't even know how conscious she was originally that so much of herself was making its way into the characters, just because so many times I hear authors speak and it's not until they reread what they wrote that they realize, how many parts of themselves are in a character. So I don't know if it was intentional or not. But just as an example, and now, here he goes talking about Marcia Clark, because it wouldn't be an episode if I didn't say something about Marcia Clark. But her first series was about a prosecutor, who did special trials, which is what she did. And I did an interview once with her, and I was like, we're going to have some fun with this, because Marcia says, it's really not her. So I made a list of all the comparisons that I could find between the two characters. And she's like, holy shit, John, she is me. I just didn't know it. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. It's some distance.
Yeah, and I think that, well, like your experiences and what you live through, I think that they just come through, because what else are you going to write about but what you know? Or, in Patricia Cornwell's case, what you learn, because her research is extensive. So, yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to actually have somebody ask her if that was a conscious choice or not, or if that's just what happened. But I really don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating now that we have more of a timeline of her life with this memoir. As we're rereading the books, as Emily said, we're just starting book 6. To kind of see, like, how do these, like, to plot it out on a grid, right? And see how things converge. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there was that time when she was heading into a dark place where she needed to step back and look at her creativity and kind of inject it again with whatever she needed it to be injected with. And to see, like, was that when she met her partner, Stacy Gruber, her wife now, who is, a Harvard brain specialist, who I think is the one who got her on bipolar medication that helped tremendously. So is it, the combination of the therapy and the medication that does bring back a sense of hope in her books, Because for a while there, they felt a little hopeless, the Scarpetta books. And they were very dark.
Right.
And now I feel like they do have maybe more of a sense of hope. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really do think that Stacy is like a guiding and grounding force in her life. Like, I think that things have just seemed much more stable after they got together. That's just my impression of things. But it is interesting because there's, looking back, two different periods, where it seems like she sort of fell out with Scarpetta. And the first one was after she did all the Jack the Ripper research, and she said, and she doesn't really discuss this much in the memoir, but that took her to a really, really dark place. And after writing the true crime book, when she couldn't do it the same way, and so for several books, she switched to writing in third person, so we weren't in Scarpetta's head anymore. And so, yeah, the books were really stark because I feel like Scarpetta is always the light in the darkness, and when you sort of take her intimate perspective away, you don't have that as much. And then, 4 or 5 books later, she came around, she came back to the first person. I think that was in Port Mortuary. And she did a couple books which were first person. They were a bit uneven, but I think that they started to bring the fan base back that had become sort of disenfranchised. And then with Chaos, and this is when she'd been together with Stacy for a while, she and Scarpetta, she says, got sick of each other. They had nothing left to say to each other. And she thought that was going to be the end of it. And she didn't write Scarpetta for 4 or 5 years. She did the space thrillers. She researched at NASA. And then COVID hit, and she sort of found herself, craving familiarity. And Scarpetta popped up. And she said it was very visceral to her. Like, Scarpetta was sitting in a garden and they had a conversation with each other where it was like, do you think that we want to work together again? And Scarpetta said, you've learned some new things. So yeah, you had more to learn. And now we have more to research and explore together. And so the reboot really came with Autopsy, which I think was 2021. Maybe. And yeah, and she sort of likened it to going back to, the original flavor of Coke. They always mess with the recipe and end up going back to what it was to begin with. And she said she really felt like she sort of recaptured the energy of the earlier books. And I would agree. But like I said, they're a bit more speculative. People might be surprised because she explores some unusual terrain. But I really like that because she says she's absolutely fascinated by the unknown. It's really clear that she believes that there is a world out there that we have only sort of scratched the surface of. And so she has her characters doing the same thing. And the books are not woo-woo, but she really makes you think about things. And she explores cutting-edge technology that so many of us probably aren't even aware of that she's learned about through her research. So it's really about this cutting-edge technology and the potential for good, but also the potential for bad when the wrong people have access to it.
Yeah. And so listeners, John has actually interviewed Cornwell several times, and we'll put a link in the show notes to any of those articles that are available online.
Yeah, John asks the best questions. We've been interviewed by him ourselves and always pulls up great information. So we will definitely do that. So as someone who hasn't read the series, I just want to clarify for people, it's 29 books deep now. Mm-hmm. You guys are currently on a reread. You've read 5. And listeners, if you listen to past episodes, Chris has talked about all 5 of those. You're currently reading book 6. You meet monthly over pizza, donuts, coffee, something to talk about these books. You've read the memoir that Cornwell has written, True Crime, which just came out in early May. And so you're going to read through the series, and I know that there could potentially be more books added because it's going to take you a couple of years to get through the series. But can you pinpoint the area of the series where you're saying like it kind of lost its way and then came back? Do you know, like in your minds, where that happened?
Well, I have an impression of that. Do you have an impression of that, Chris? I feel like something happened in Point of Origin that was a really sort of dramatic and serious moment, and that affected several books, and then it was sort of undone in a later book. So I think it started to go a little bit wonky there, and then the whole Jack the Ripper bit was sort of happening kind of immediately after that, so successive books were a little bit darker too. So I think it was, maybe those two things happening around the same time. So we're going to be at that point, pretty soon in a couple books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it'll be really interesting to look at that. And what I'm really curious about is Cornwell had written 3 mystery novels that were rejected. And the main protagonist was a man. But there was this side character, a woman character, right, who was mentioned over like 100 times or something in the third novel that got rejected. And Cornwell asked an editor at the Mysterious Press if she should just quit writing. And the editor said, no. She's like, are you writing about what you do? And she's like, well, I work in a morgue. I don't think anybody. And she's like, no, I want to see what you see. You should write about that. And she did. And so Scarpetta was born.
Oh, interesting. So the mysteries were written prior to the Scarpetta series, but she took that character kind of. And got
so
it.
She took that character, and and it's a thriller, right? They're medical, legal. They're thrillers. They're not traditional mysteries. And I think when Postmortem was first published, like people really didn't know what to do with it. It kind of didn't have a big splash, but then as I wrote in my review, it gains speed pretty quickly. And she becomes, the highest paid woman writer until J.K. Rowling comes along, right?
Right.
At one point, Cornwell hires her ex-husband to be her personal editor. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the trajectory of her stories or how she writes. So we do have a date for that, a year for that. So that's what I'm going to be paying attention to as we continue reading on. But I do remember probably maybe Black Notice, The Last Precinct. And those were like 1999, 2000. But then for me, it picked up again a little bit with Blowfly. But then it got strange again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because The Last Precinct and Black Notice, that's actually where I started reading Scarpetta going forward, because those were the current books when I first read her. I did not start at Postmortem.
Oh, interesting.
No, my cousin, we used to swap books, and it used to be later, like we would always trade the Newman Higgins Clark back and forth, and she's about a decade older than me. She won't be listening anyway, it doesn't matter. But, she would come over on Saturdays and she would cut everybody's hair and stuff, and she would always have a book, and she showed up one day with Cruel and Unusual, and she gave it to me, and I'd never read Patricia Cornwell. I don't know that I'd ever heard of her. And she was like, this book is so disturbing that, like, I can't have it in my apartment. I don't care what you do with it, but, like, whatever you do, don't give it back to me because I won't take it. And I mean, what better endorsement, for a book, right? So, of course, I read it immediately. I was, like, deeply disturbed, which I loved. And so then I'm like, all right, I got to catch up on this Patricia Cornwell lady. And it just so happened that that's when she was writing, The Last Precinct and Black Notice. So I was reading forward and catching up on the backlist. But I'm actually kind of glad that I started there, because one of the things I told Chris is I was surprised that when I read Postmortem again, I was not as enthralled with Kay Scarpetta in that book as I expected to be. I felt like she was not, the same character that she becomes a few books, down the line. So I was glad that my first experience was a couple books into the series when some of the relationships and character dynamics and personalities were fleshed out a bit more. And if I can jump back really quickly to something Chris said, one of the things that I find fascinating is Patricia Cornwell will say that, she doesn't write mysteries. To her, they are crime novels, and it's like a very clear distinction. So if you're expecting, that you're going to meet the killer in the first chapter and they'll show up again at the end, like that's usually not what happens, because that's not how things play out in real life necessarily. And just to give you a real quick personal anecdote, like I said, she did a couple space thrillers before she rebooted Scarpetta, and we offered her the cover for Mystery Scene magazine, and she turned it down, and she actually had her publicist call me because she's like, I don't want you to be offended by this at all. I'm really appreciative of the offer. But she didn't want people to get the wrong idea, thinking those books especially, were sort of the traditional mystery, because they were so far outside of that and even so far beyond the scope of Scarpetta. But, in a small world where things circle back, we did get to do the cover when Autopsy came out.
So are they sci-fi? Like, what are those other ones?
It's not even so much sci-fi. It's sort of like, again, it's her doing the research and seeing what the current technology is. And if I remember correctly, she has two sister characters, one of whom I believe is an astronaut, and the other, I believe, died. And, maybe there's this communication going on between, worlds. I don't know. It was interesting, but a very different type of book and definitely not a traditional mystery. And she just didn't want to give the wrong impression, which I think how many people, would decline the cover of a national magazine for that reason. So I was actually really impressed by that. Like, wasn't like saddened by it. I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. And I doubt that a lot of people, would eschew that kind of attention. So, but I also love, like I said, that we got to come back around when she rebooted Scarpetta. So that was kind of cool, but it's just not many people would do that. And I think that's how serious she is about her work and categorizing it correctly so people, understand what they're getting into when they pick up one of those books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about how we both enjoyed the earlier parts of the memoir. That seems at some point like there was a break and it became a different type of book. And that was at the 75% mark, according to the pagination that I figured out. And the second part becomes really kind of name droppy, and it doesn't seem as reflective, and the pacing is not what it had been. I did have some enjoyment of that section for sure. Like, it was really fun to read about her possibly being related to Harriet Beecher Stowe and getting a tour of the Harriet Beecher Stowe home here in Hartford, Connecticut by Joan Hendrick, who won a Pulitzer Prize for the biography that she wrote of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And then after the house tour, they went to the archives together. That was exciting. But other names that get dropped. There are a lot of politicians, a lot of movie stars and famous people like Oprah. What are your thoughts, John, on the second part or the last quarter of the book?
I agree with you. I do think it was not as even, not as fleshed out. And again, I'm wondering, like, maybe she wasn't journaling. And I think that so many of our memories are fallible and you remember this, but not that. I'm sure she also felt the need to, like, wrap it up because at that point she's probably already, 300 pages into the book, and it could have gone on forever. It's just funny. A lot of times when I read, I don't want to say celebrity memoirs, but I mean, Patricia Cornwell is in her own right a celebrity, but I feel like, you spend a lot of time going through the childhood stuff, and it really is interesting because it's formative, but you're waiting to get to the stuff that you really want to hear about. Like, I'm always interested in the story development, in the character development, in the inside world of publishing. And I feel like, again, by the time oftentimes when the authors get there, there's only so much room left, so you're not getting, necessarily as much of that as you want. So you do learn a lot about the creation of Scarpetta and maybe the early books. And then there's a lot of books and a lot of research that you never hear about, and it's just sort of, she's picking and choosing what she's going to tell you about. I do think that she's, very candid, though. I mean, she's very open, about the car crash that she had, the DUI, the fact that she played a big role in the failure to get Scarpetta to the screen earlier because, she says that she was very rigid, she was having trouble giving up control, and she was attached to some of the early screenplays and she didn't know how to write a screenplay. And I think that, just the fact that she can look back on that and be so open about it is kind of impressive and inspiring. But yeah, I mean, it was uneven, and I would have loved another 100 or 200 pages of, Scarpetta and the research that she did for some of the more recent books because, most of that falls away. Maybe you get a couple sentences about the space thrillers, a couple sentences about the new Scarpetta, but it's not nearly as cohesive as the earlier part of the book. But again, I think she probably had a lot less to draw on, too, because she probably doesn't have diaries and journals. She's writing the Scarpetta books. I don't know that she's also writing the minutia of her day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, like, there are many people who write multiple memoirs, and from just hearing the two of you talk about it, and then there is a New York Times book review that we all read prior to this conversation, and we can put a gift link in the show notes for that too if folks want to read it. Perhaps it would have served her better to just write about her childhood in this first memoir and then write some other ones moving forward. Maybe people would have been frustrated, like, we want to hear about Scarpetta. But it also seems like there's a lot of Scarpetta in her early childhood that you saw.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. And she does say, like, I really appreciate the title True Crime because that has a lot of different interpretations. And then her preface is called, what is it called? Something like Why I Did It.
Right.
And she talks about that there's talk of a biopic, a TV series on her life. And so she also wanted to write it to get the facts out there as she understands them and her life as she understands it. So that's an interesting thing. And I also wonder if it was maybe a little rushed to get it out while the Scarpetta TV series that's now on Prime right now, to get the memoir out while that is really hot.
Right, which is why she was in the New Yorker also, because it was the beginning of that. Book Currents introduces that the Scarpetta series is going to prime time, Yeah, interesting.
But I was surprised because I thought I would have liked the post-mortem part of the book more, when she's in her, really developing her writing chops and creating this series character. But looking back at the memoir as a whole, I really enjoyed the childhood part the most. And I would recommend it to people who like memoir in general. I think they'd really like that childhood section.
Well, yeah, I would agree. You know what? I mean, usually that's the stuff that I'm like, I can't wait to get through.
Yes.
But I have to say, I mean, it was so well done, so flowy, so immersive. And I mean, you really do get an idea of, who she is now and where that came from. And in the introduction that you were talking about, she does say, like, she had no intention of writing a memoir. She's told people for years it's never going to happen. And yeah, there was, a TV series based on her life that was in the works, and they sent her an outline and I think the script for like the first show, which dealt with her childhood. And she said she didn't recognize herself, and that's why she felt the need. She started just writing notes for them, like, this is what really happened, and she delivered a manuscript 5 months early, sharp force, so she had this pocket of time, and so it went from notes to, this really, really large manuscript. But the other thing that she mentions at the end of that introduction, which I found really fascinating, is going through the process, she was able to see Daniels, who she was as a young person, became the Patricia Cornwell of today. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why, the childhood is so foundational. And so I would say, that's very much recommended. It's just interesting to see she's had such bizarre experiences as, a popular adult author. Like, most people never achieve kind of the fame and notoriety that she has, and it's crazy, the relationships that she's had, the stalkers that she's had. People sometimes will call her paranoid because she's very security conscious, but knowing what she knows and experiencing what she's experienced, I mean, it's very much understandable, why the walls would be up. But I think it's interesting because she's really reached a point in her life where she's letting the walls down, she's letting people in, and she's sort of giving up some of that control that was very important to her for so many years.
Well, I think that's a great statement to end our Scarpetta Cornwell conversation part of this episode and shift gears into a very different world.
Yes. But before we do, that was a lovely transition, Chris. Before we do, can you guys just let listeners know what book 6 is that you're going to be reading next?
Sure. Book 6 is From Potter's Field.
Okay. So that's where they are. And also in the show notes will be a link to Chris's blog post where she originally introduced this buddy read with John. So it lists all of the current Scarpetta books, and you can follow along with their progress. And Chris also has a blog post with a review of True Crime by Patricia Cornwell. So all of those links will be in the show notes.
I'm writing my review right now, and I'm finding that I need to go back and edit it down because so much of it is about like the early part of the book, which is kind of ironic, but it's way too long for a book review, and that's why.
Well, we will link to that when it is done.
Yes.
As well. Lots of links for you. So John and I did a buddy read of Welcome to the Hayanam Dong Bookshop by Hwang Bo-Riem, translated by Shauna Tan. And I also listened to the audiobook in parts, John. I don't know if you did. And that was narrated by Rosa Escoda.
I did not. I read it.
Okay. And I think you and Chris also both read Every Day I Read, 53 Ways to Get Closer to Books, which is a nonfiction book that Hwang wrote with the same translator and the same narrator for the audiobook.
Yeah, I read it earlier this year.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of serendipity when we came back around to her. I didn't expect that to happen. But again, really interesting because, reading about her experiences, you can definitely see how they influence the characters in the book for sure.
Yes, that's interesting. And also we should say that we chose to read this book based on both reading, not together per se, but like close in time, the Libby Page novel. This book made me think of you. And so John and I both read it, and the conceit of that novel involved an independent bookstore. In opening chapters or parts of the novel, the bookstore made recommendations about books. And so after John and I read that, we said, wouldn't it be fun to choose a book from that novel and buddy read it together? So that's how this came to be.
Yeah, I just gravitate towards, books about books and people who write books and people who sell books and spaces where books are sold. Whenever I need a palate cleanser, I find myself gravitating towards those type of things. And one of the chapters in the recommendations, it was all, sort of bibliophile books. Like if you're a bibliophile, you'll enjoy these. And so, we sort of mutually agreed that this book sounded like it would be a fun one to read, and it definitely was, because we got to live in that world, so richly. I feel like a lot of times these books aren't set as much in the actual bookstore as this one really is. So it was a lot of fun. It was, sort of like vicariously just being in your favorite indie for, 300 pages or whatever it is.
Right. I mean, the irony is we chose a book that was about books, right? And so just to give you a quick synopsis, the main character is Jung, and she does come to own a bookstore, but she comes to own this bookstore after living a life that looked very different. She was married. She'd done kind of, as I said, I think on an earlier episode, all the shoulds. She'd gone to school. She became the person that she thought she should become, and she wasn't happy with her life. And she was feeling lost and ended up opening this bookstore, even though she knew nothing about owning a bookstore. And then a cast of characters starts to come and enter her life via the bookstore, including Min Jun, I think was his name, who became the barista for the store, and Jimin, who sells them the coffee that they use in the cafe, and a host of other people that become customers of the store and start to host events and things like that. So as she's learning to run a bookstore, she's also learning how to interact with people and even how to sell books. Like she realized she was really bad at recommending books to her customers at first. And I enjoyed that part of the novel.
Oh, it's funny because, people would look at her and see how uncomfortable and uninviting she looked behind the desk, and they would just turn around at the door and walk away. Like they wouldn't even come in the store. So I guess it's nice that she had the luxury of, building her business model over time. But it really was fascinating to see, how she recaptured her love of books, but also to see how the bookstore, served as sort of a community hub, because a lot of these people aren't even there, for the books or the coffee. Two of my favorite things, books and coffee. I have to say, I really enjoyed there being a barista character and learning all about coffee in addition to books. That was a lot of fun. But people are just, connecting and making conversation and realizing what they have in common. And it all happens over the stretch of, a year or more. So it doesn't happen super quickly, but it's also there's not this pressure you just need to buy a book. There's one lady who comes in and she's between jobs and she needs a bit of a break, and she's a knitter, and people are just entranced, by her knitting, but it takes her a long time to open up. But again, she wants to be respectful of the shop. So I think she decides if she's there every 3 hours or so, she's going to buy a cup of coffee to support the business so that she's not a burden to them. But she's also not really there for the books. She's there for the community that she finds.
Right. And there's another customer that keeps coming in and just reading the book a little bit at a time.
Oh, yeah.
And then leaving. And then, finally she kind of slaps his wrist and says as Roxanne Cody says, who owns RJ Julia's, this isn't set design. I actually need you to buy some books. Yeah, I was going to read two things that I noted, John. One was about the knitting. There are two great things about returning to reality after a couple hours of knitting. First, I made something. Second, I feel refreshed. At the very least, I wasn't angry while I knitted. That's nice.
Good thing with the needles.
Yes, exactly. I do have a weapon, so if I can't get my anger under control, they're thinking Scarpetta, you guys. They're always thinking Scarpetta.
There it is.
And then I thought this was interesting that the character who owns the coffee company that's selling the coffee to them is called Goat Coffee. Yeah. And they tell you, and I thought this for my partner in crime over here who loves coffee, according to legend, coffee was discovered thanks to a herd of goats. When they ate a small, round, red fruit, they were very energetic and began to prance about, leading the goat herder to discover the coffee fruit and its properties.
I'd heard that. Yeah. I think I read a memoir by the CEO of Starbucks. I can't remember his name. And I read a couple books about coffee because I did work as a barista for a tiny bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
So
I get all energetic and hop around when I have my first cup.
I don't. My heart just races. That's why I drink tea.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, my gentleman caller this morning said, "Do you want coffee?" And I said, "No, because people need to live with me today."
and understand her. So she's not talking the way that she has it on the podcast, you know?
It's really, I already do that enough. I don't need any help. But one thing that I felt like with this novel, and I don't know if you felt this way, John, and I do think it could have to do with the translation, but I felt like it got a little bogged down in the whole thing about like work-life balance. There's scenes where they have these people just talking about their work and how, they're not happy, which is the reason that she left her previous life and did come to own this bookstore and is finding more balance in her life. But in doing a little research, because I was thinking like maybe this is a little bit more, this is a Korean writer, and maybe it's a little bit more like of not faux pas, what's the right word? Risk-taking to talk about these things, like, not following the path that is forged for you or expected of you. And in doing a little research, I learned that this book is in a category in Korea that they refer to as healing fiction, which isn't a term I think we have more like cozy in here. And when I found the definition of it, it says, these stories all share a comforting ability to turn everyday struggles like heartbreak, loneliness, and regret, into opportunities for growth and self-discovery, uplifting reads that offer solace and renewal, and a cozy read, different from cozy mysteries, which are gently killing people. That's my little addition.
Gently killing people off the page.
Right.
Killing me softly. Yeah, sorry.
With your knitting needles.
So, I appreciated the themes I wrote were about divorce. Like she gets divorced, which I imagine in Korea might be something that's, not readily accepted. And work-life balance and friendship and slowing down and renegotiating your priorities. And then classroom versus experiential learning, because there's a character that comes in and he's younger and he's reading and he's like, school's really hard for me. And she says, you can learn through these books in different ways. And then, of course, the ins and outs of running a bookstore. So how did you feel about those parts about the work-life balance? And
I agree. I do think that there were parts that were a little bit dense, and I was kind of surprised. But having read the essay collection, I'm like, all right, well, from the author's own experience, because, she was a reader, when she was young, voraciously so. And then after doing all those things you're supposed to do, going to school and going to college and getting your degrees, she got a really good job, I believe, in IT tech with a cell phone company. And she said that, it literally took over her life. She was there all the time, constantly doing overtime, not unusual for her to be in the office at midnight and then repeat it the next day. And so she sort of started to lose that relationship with books, and really the only time that she had to read was during her commute. And she said that she was sort of fanatical about it because that's the only time that she got to read, and that was sort of her escape from the pressures of her job. And so she would be, I think, on the train and just reading like crazy, because I think that was her stability. And I can say too, I can relate to that. I mean, I've not had a job like that, but I feel like there are times that reading has kept me from going insane when things in my life have been incredibly chaotic. And it was the days where there was not time to read at all, where I really felt like, oh my God, I'm going to go off the rails. And so when there are those days, even if it's a couple pages before bed, I'm like, I better pick up a book, because otherwise things aren't going to be pretty. But I do think too, it is very much of a cultural thing. And we do find out, in this book, that these aren't discussions that people are having openly. And it really does take months and months and months for the characters, to talk about the things that they're disenfranchised with. We know a bit about it because we follow these characters and we sort of get insights into their internal dialogue, but the things that they've experienced and the things that they're thinking about, they haven't necessarily shared with the other people in the bookshop. And so it's not until much later that we realize, how imbalanced these people feel and how marginalized and how they just needed sort of a low pressure space where they could be themselves and not have any burdens or expectations. And really, that's sort of what happened with Hwang Bo-room is she had to leave her job because she was like, it's going to make me crazy. I can't sustain this. And so then, she found her way back to books. And so she was reading again, and then she started writing. But something, that came right out of, I think, the essay collection was there's at one point where somebody's trying to retrain themselves to have a tolerance for reading. And so they take out, a timer and they set it for 20 minutes at a time with the hope being eventually you'll hit an hour or more and then you won't need the timer. So, that I think was something that she did in her personal life. And then that carries over into the book. So there's, I think, a lot of the essence of her truth in the novel. And like you said, Emily, the protagonist, she burned out on her job. She ended up getting a divorce because she and her husband were working in the same place. And she realized that that was the foundation of their relationship. And they really didn't have anything else in common other than work. But it was so rare, for a woman to walk away from her job and her husband that her mom stopped talking to her.
Yeah. Wow. So that's interesting. I didn't know all that autobiographical part of it, John. Thank you for filling me in on that aspect of the author's life as well.
It's just interesting to have read both of those books,
yeah.
This year.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think about Every Day I Read when she talks about the rise of book clubs in Korean culture, South Korea, and how it's giving space for people to express their opinions publicly in a culture where you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to have opinions. You're apparently supposed to just put your nose to the grindstone and go and do what you should.
There's a lot of aspects of this novel. There are these book clubs where people are coming in and having these, which, like I said, afterwards, I thought in South Korea, these are probably risk-taking. Is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah, I think
sounds like it, yeah.
Risk-taking conversations, but supported by other people, which,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, so in thinking about all of that more, I enjoyed the novel, and I'm glad I read it. I do think I had a hard time connecting with the characters a little bit, and I think that might have been more of a translation issue than anything else. And I appreciate the author doing her own risk-taking by writing these books that might be also considered to be risk-taking as well.
Right. Yeah, I think I enjoyed it more because I just happened to have read the essay collection, and so I felt more connected to it. But I can definitely see how, if you pick this up blindly, maybe you're not going to have that same connection. But it was really interesting to read, a book about books from a different culture because they're referencing books, that we've never heard of. And it's interesting to me, like, the cover I have, not that people are going to see this, but it's very light and sort of cheery. But the hardcover version is sort of really dark. And there it is.
Yeah.
See, Emily has that. And I'm like, that's interesting. But it's because her bookshop, she doesn't open her bookshop until 1:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon for it to be open at 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I started to keep track of all the books that were mentioned, and then there were so many, and then I switched from the hardcover to my Kindle and to audiobook. But this was another book like the Libby Page novel where you really could choose to do some reading out of it as well.
You could. And the other thing I was impressed by, and we sort of talked about this a little bit, but there was sort of so much about her building her business model, which I didn't expect, because a lot of times, even when books are set in a bookstore, you don't necessarily get a lot of that, but you're really seeing her, learn how to choose what books to stock and what events to have, because initially it's nothing. It's like a half-empty store with sort of a chaotic array of books. And then she becomes much more, intentional.
Right, and disciplined, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, disciplined. And it's just really interesting to see it grow and to have her start to have these book clubs where people can have a conversation and to bring people in to, teach of their own expertise. And so you see it becoming something much more than it was. And she sort of finds herself in that process, and so does everybody else, because really all these characters, despite their different experiences, they're sort of lost and they're looking for meaning again, and they find it in the bookstore. And I think that that's kind of beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, and I think we could leave the conversation here, but this made me laugh, Chris, and made me think of you, because Chris used to work at Borders, that there's one point where she realizes as a bookstore owner, she doesn't get as much time to read.
Oh,
And there's always that assumption that if you work in a bookstore, all you'll do is read all day.
Yeah. Like when I used to interview people, especially younger people, who'd say, I've been coming here like since I was a little kid, coming to story time. And I just, I love being here and I really want to work here. And I'll say, well, have you noticed what the employees do? And so often that's not something that you notice until you know.
Right.
That you're constantly running around helping people. You're constantly restocking things. You're working at the registers. You're cleaning toilets even,
Right.
Yeah.
But you don't just get to pet books all day and look at them as much as we'd like to think that's what owning or working in a bookstore is.
You do have moments of that.
Yes.
Which makes it all worth it. But I also want to point out to John, this chair that I'm sitting on is actually a Borders Cafe chair.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
Yeah, Laura and I have two
Borders
of them.
lives on.
Yes, it
that's
does.
Right. Well, John, thank you so much for spending time with us today to talk about our buddy reads.
I was happy to. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for giving me an excuse to take a very slight break from blood splatter, which I'm now firmly back into thanks to Chris. But I feel well balanced today.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.